The 75th NATO summit is taking place in Washington this week, and I'm delighted to be joined by Kurt Volker, the former US ambassador to NATO from 2008 to 2009. Thank you so much for your time. I'd like to start by asking you what you think of the announcements made so far ahead of this summit properly.
Unfortunately, I think there is an effort to play down expectations as to what might actually happen here. The key things that need to happen are to articulate a clear plan for Ukraine defeating Russia and ending the war. How does Ukraine achieve a victory? The second thing is a pathway for Ukraine to join NATO as soon as possible. What we're seeing are incremental steps instead. We're seeing a bit more help for Ukraine on air defense. We're seeing the establishment of a NATO command that's going to actually help coordinate assistance and prepare Ukraine for future membership someday, but really nothing decisive moving this forward. And this is, of course, all being overshadowed a little bit by continuing questions about President Biden's health and his fitness to lead both the United States and NATO for the rest of this year, and if he were to run for re-election, if he would be elected and serve his term or not.
So to go into some of the specifics, as we're recording this, the Secretary of State, Antony Blinken, says the transfer of F-16 fighter jets to Ukraine is happening as we speak, and they should be, in use by the summer. What are your thoughts on that?
We are in July of 2024, and Russia invaded Ukraine in a massive way in February 2022. This has taken a very, very long time to get Ukraine any kind of air support. And we should have started on this 2 years ago. We should have delivered it a year ago. It's great that it's happening now. And there's one thing that not everyone is talking about, but it's great to have the aircraft, but the aircraft need to be integrated into an intelligence and communications platform with ground forces and with missile forces and air defense forces, so that they are not just a fighter plane with weapons on it, but part of an integrated system. And that's still something that needs to be developed and delivered to Ukraine.
So a bit slow and not enough action on air defense front.
As has been the case all along. If you think back to 22, we said we wouldn't provide Stinger missiles. We said we wouldn't provide armor. We said we wouldn't provide artillery. Then we weren't going to provide long-range artillery. And then we weren't going to provide the longest range artillery. And every step of the way, we said no before we said yes. It took a long time to get there. And then when we finally provided it, even now, we're imposing restrictions on the use. So whereas Russia bombs Ukraine and destroys the largest children's hospital in Kyiv from airfields far away inside Russia, we tell Ukraine, oh, don't fire back at those airfields.
Do you think that the stated agenda for this 75th NATO summit is ambitious enough?
No, it's not. It ought to be more ambitious. I understand the desire to say, look, 75 years, NATO is the strongest alliance in history. We've succeeded in protecting ourselves. But let's face up to it. We are facing the largest war in Europe since World War II, since NATO was founded. And we are not stopping it. We do not have a plan for how Ukraine wins this war and we restore peace in Europe. That should be mission number one. Number two is that we are seeing already that Russia is linked to Iran, is linked to North Korea, is linked to China. And we have a war in the Middle East. We have Chinese ambitions on Taiwan. We have to stop this war in Europe now before it turns into a global war. And again, I don't feel that we have grasped that and really put ourselves on the kind of footing needed to stop the war in Europe as soon as we can.
And why this lack of ambition? What's the cause of it?
Fear. Our policies are governed by fear, which is fear of escalation, fear of use of nuclear weapons, fear that our domestic critics are going to say we're causing a war, all of these fears about doing something. And we underestimate the costs of not doing something. We underestimate the risks that we face by inaction. And instead of fear, we should be governed by purpose. We should say clearly that it is a vital interest of Europe and the United States to ensure that Putin and what he represents, aggression, genocide, imperialist conquest, we stand firmly against that, and we will make sure it will not succeed. And we will do everything in our power to stop him. And we are far more capable, far more powerful than Russia is, economically, militarily, and so on. We just have to decide that it is important enough to take those steps.
And are you able to identify any particular member states that might be behind this level of caution?
Yeah, the United States and Germany are the two most important ones. We constantly see U.S. And Germany collaborating on an incremental approach rather than on a decisive approach. Take, for example, the decisions about providing tanks to Ukraine. Germany wouldn't do it. U.S. wouldn't do it. Germany said, well, we'll do it if the U.S. does it. We took a year. Then we finally decided, okay, we'll give you some Abrams. And then Germany moved on the Leopard tanks. We're doing the same thing on the longest range weapon systems now. Germany's still not providing the Taurus long range missile system. Aircraft, we're just now getting the Dutch and Norwegian donated F 16s into Ukraine, but the US is not providing any F 16s or any other aircraft. So a lot of reluctance from the US and Germany. There's one other country which is very skeptical about aid to Ukraine, and that's Hungary. But I don't believe Hungary's objections would stand or deter or prevent NATO from acting if the US and Germany were more determined.
We've touched on it a little bit, that one of the main topics of discussion will be increased contributions, increased funding for NATO. Do you think those member states that are contributing less, for example, Canada, will be persuaded to step up funding for the alliance?
I think Canada is the best example you can give there because I think it is incredibly embarrassing for Trudeau to show up here with France now hitting 2% of GDP, Germany hitting 2% of GDP, the UK doing so, Italy on its way there, and Canada still woefully below that. So I do think there's going to be a lot of pressure on Canada to increase its own defense spending. And for the UK, Keir Starmer is coming in with a robust level of UK defense spending. That's very good. But he's also facing calls from within Britain to increase it further. And with Labour coming in, I think there's going to be a lot of demands on the budget. So it's unclear what the future will be for the UK, even though they have done an awful lot so far.
I think, I'd like to talk about Ukraine's membership of NATO. It doesn't seem that's likely to be happening any time soon, although there seems to be a kind of a trajectory that might happen in the future. I suppose what I'd like to ask is that, in a world where Donald Trump becomes president and succeeds in ending the war in Ukraine within 24 hours, as he said he would do, how long after that do you think we might see Ukraine becoming a member of NATO?
Well, that's a very good question. And let me take it in a few different pieces, if I could. The first piece is ending the war in 24 hours. Vladimir Putin is conducting this war on purpose because he wants to eliminate Ukraine as a people, a country, a national identity, and take it over as part of Russia. So telling Ukraine stop fighting, telling Ukraine to have a ceasefire, none of that is going to stop the war because Putin is the one who's conducting the war. So how do you get Putin to stop? The way you get Putin to stop is to confront him with overwhelming force so that he sees he cannot possibly win. That is the only way that you can stop the war. I don't think that is exactly what Donald Trump is thinking yet, but I think he's getting there because you do hear him indicate the reason that we are in this war now is what he sees as the weakness of President Biden and the Biden administration. So we have to reestablish a position of strength. His former national security advisor, Robert O'Brien, wrote a piece recently in Foreign Affairs where he emphasized that theme again and again. We have to reestablish peace through strength. So I think that is an indicator of where things go. And it won't take 24 hours. It's going to take a lot longer. But I think that's the first step. The second thing is we could bring Ukraine into NATO today if we wanted to. There is no reason why you can't. We brought Germany into NATO when it was divided and partially occupied by the Soviet Union. We have had countries that were democracies. We had countries that were not democracies. It is all about making the decision that we're better off with Ukraine in, and we can reestablish deterrence than without. We would have to make some decisions. We'd have to decide, what does Article 5 mean, the collective defense commitment, in the case of Ukraine when part of the territory is still occupied. But we could presumably, for example, say we will defend the Ukrainian-owned territory. We will not participate in military efforts to retake occupied territory, but we will also not recognize it as part of Russia. We will not accept this, and we look for a longer-term solution. That's just one example. We could also define the steps that we take to help defend Ukraine that are short of ground troops. There's nothing in Article 5 that says you must send ground troops to the front line. We could be taking part in air defense of Ukraine. We could put aircraft in the skies. We could put ships in the Black Sea to keep freedom of navigation. There's a lot of things that we could do in addition to the many things that we're already doing. So that could be done today. We don't have to wait for President Trump for that. And then the third thing is, well, what would Trump do? And here the simple answer is we don't know. We know he wants to end the war. We know he doesn't want future wars. The question is, does he see NATO membership as a pathway to preventing future war? Or is he worried that that imposes an unfair commitment on the United States? That we don't know. We haven't heard that from him yet. But all of the signs, I would argue, point toward NATO membership for Ukraine. Because if you want burden sharing, don't put the U.S. in the position of having to provide half of all the military support to Ukraine. Bring him into NATO, and the U.S. cost share there is only 20%. And if you want to deter Putin from a future war, bring him into NATO, because he doesn't attack NATO. He has attacked countries that are not in NATO. So I think the signs point there, but we have to hear it from President Trump himself if he's reelected.
And the signs point to Ukraine membership, but unlikely it's unlikely to have progress made on that front after this particular summit.
Yeah, it's not happening at this summit. The Biden administration and the Scholz administration in Germany were very clear. They set a low bar. They said we keep coming up with these metaphors. We're going to have a bridge to membership, and it's going to be a well-lit and a sturdy bridge, and maybe even a short bridge. But all of this is dressing up the fact that it is not an invitation to membership.
And what do you think perceptions of President Biden's health, how will those impact on the alliance, the strength of the alliance, the future of the alliance?
Yeah, so several things, and it's really day by day that people are watching this now. All of our allies, as well as all of our adversaries, watched the presidential debate on June 27th and saw a man who is the president of the United States unable, physically or mentally, to articulate what he's thinking and to show any ability to lead. That alarmed people quite a bit. They've come here to Washington this week to see, well, how's it going to go now? Yesterday, President Biden gave a prepared speech with teleprompters at the Mellon Auditorium, and it went quite well. He gave a good speech. It was not defining a pathway to victory for Ukraine. It was short of that, which is disappointing. But he was able to deliver it at least with a full voice and not lose his place. So people were a bit reassured that that went well. Today we have closed door meetings. Tomorrow President Biden will have a press conference, and that will be unscripted, and it'll be very interesting to see how that goes. But allies are watching this very carefully to see if he has the ability to lead the alliance now for the next 6 months as president. Let alone whether he's able to run for re-election as president. And they're also watching what's happening in our domestic politics. We have an increasing number of people on the Democratic side calling for Biden not to run for re-election, including today Nancy Pelosi came out and said he needs to consider that. So allies are saying, look, if his own party is coming out and saying he's not fit to run for re-election, then how confident can we be in his leadership of the alliance today? So that's a worry. And they see our adversaries looking at this as well, and Russia stepping up attacks in Ukraine, and China making noise about Taiwan, and Iran having already attacked Israel directly and may do so again. So there's a lot of worry over that. And I have to just say, too, the flip side to that worry is if it's not Biden, it's President Trump. And they also are concerned about what his level of support for Ukraine would be and what his level of support for NATO would be. So they're spending a lot of time in private meetings around town, trying to get a sense of where Trump is in his thinking about Europe and the war.
In your experience, what? Well, I suppose the question really is, what what would you like the outcome of this summit? What would you like the outcome of this summit ideally to be? And in your experience, how realistic would that be?
Well, so look, the outcome of the summit is already known. We're not going to get anything new out of this. It was pre-planned, it's planned weeks and months ago. What it should have been is a clear commitment to doing everything needed to help Ukraine defeat Russian forces inside Ukraine, win the war. That's number one. Number two, issue a clear invitation to Ukraine to begin accession talks to join the alliance as quickly as possible. Get that train moving. Everything needs to be done in order to send a strong signal to Putin that this train has left the station. He will not win. He will never win. And we are prepared to use all the resources at our disposal to guarantee that Ukraine will be a sovereign, democratic European country in the EU and in NATO. And that is happening as quickly as possible. There's nothing he can do about it. That should have been the message. What we're getting is nothing anywhere near that strong. And that means we are facing the same situation in Ukraine, in the war, in Putin's thinking, as we faced before the summit took place. Uncertainty about the front line, Russian bombing attacks going on, Putin thinking he can still win, Ukraine still fighting, the West helping, but not enough. That we're going to have exactly that next week and the week after, just like we did the week before.